Hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum and greetings. I'm Dr. Anisur Rahman, Associate Professor, Department of Computer Science and Engineering. On behalf of East West University, would like to welcome you, all the participants and the viewers here in Bangladesh and around the world. It is my absolute pleasure. It is my absolute pleasure to be part of this auspicious virtual gathering, as well as to be able to conduct the webinar, and more importantly, to be in the midst of all esteemed scholars. As you might know, today is the second day of the webinar sessions. We are going to have 7 consecutive talks, followed by a closing session. I am sure these talks by these distinguished scholars would be enlighten us all and would leave us hungry for more. The webinar titled Transition from Traditional to Outcome-Based Education, Call of the Hour is quite contemporary, and researchers around the world have shown fervent interest. I'm sure these intellectual talks will be exciting and thoughtful, regardless of how contentious this school of thought is. Now, I would like to shed some light on the housekeeping. The duration of each talk would be some 50 minutes uninterrupted, and 10 minutes question and answer session. If you have any question, it is expected that you will post it in writing in Q&A, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will be picked up by our reporters and will be presented to our speaker to address. Please be informed that all the talks will be recorded for future reference and will be live streamed on Facebook.
Good morning.
At this moment, I would like to welcome our first speaker of the day, Professor Dr. Jim Tognolini. My apology, Professor, for pronouncing it wrong. I'm sure I have actually done it wrong. Director, Center for Educational Measurement and Assessment, Faculty of the Arts and Social Sciences, the University of Sydney, Australia. Formal introduction of Professor Tognolini and his talks will be presented by the session chair. Now, I would also like to welcome and request the chair, Dr. Hassan Mohammed Alamgir, Professor, Department of Pharmacy, East West University, Bangladesh, to conduct the session. Let's welcome Professor Dr. Hassan Mohammed Alamgir. Sir, please, over to you.
Thank you very much. A very good morning to all the participants from Bangladesh. It is a great pleasure to be part of this conference. And this is the second day of our 2-day conference. We had 2 great sessions yesterday, and we are looking forward to have 7 more exciting, illuminating, enlightening sessions today with 7 great distinguished speakers from across the world. It is a great honor for me to chair the first session of the day. And I will try to read a few lines from Dr. Jim Tognolini's CV. I will only read a few lines and then I will hand it over to him. He will give his presentation, and then after 40 or 50 minutes, we will have some time to take some questions. So Dr. Tognolini is currently a professor and director of the Educational Measurement and Assessment Hub at the University of Sydney and managing director of Educational Consulting Private Limited. He is also a professorial fellow at Wollongong University, Australia, and adjunct professor of education at the University of Western Australia. He has extensive experience in liaising with representatives at all levels of government and educational organizations within Australia and overseas on assessment, standards, and particularly the use of measurement information in informing system-level planning, monitoring of standards, and utilizing data for improving school-level teaching and learning. So let's welcome our professor and distinguished speaker for the morning session. Thank you very much. Again, a very good morning to all who have showed up at 8 o'clock on Saturday here. Thank you very much.
Professor, your microphone is muted. Please unmute your microphone.
Yeah, I have. I think I was just trying to share my screen here. Just wait a sec. We'll get it to share. So share. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yes, please, Professor.
Yes, we can see that.
Thank you.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me virtually to this presentation. I would like to say good morning to most of you. In fact, it's afternoon where I am, because I'm in Sydney, just up the coast from Sydney, actually. And I'm talking to you from my office. Thank you, as I said, for inviting me. I really do think this is a very good topic that you've chosen, and one that's relevant to the whole world, really, as people are grappling with the idea of moving from traditional sorts of means of assessing and teaching, etc., towards an outcome-based model. And so, good luck. Today, my topic is, does that click on for you guys all right? Is assessing, measuring and reporting on the graduate qualities of university students. So it's smack dab in the area of outcomes-based assessment for us and teaching. And during this session, I will be picking up, as it says there, things that the universities are grappling with around the world, as far as I can see. And the whole notion of graduate qualities I would like to talk about, comes from the globalization of higher education and how it's changing around the world. And we're getting lots of pressure to say we don't only need disciplinary knowledge, we really need our students to have skills, which means that they can apply that disciplinary knowledge in different contexts, etc., and which go beyond the discipline. So in response to this sort of pressure from our clients, our stakeholders, that is business and organizations, many universities around the world are saying, okay, we're hearing you. And what they've done is they've developed learning aims around what they call graduate attributes or graduate qualities. We call them graduate qualities, but you can alternate. The sort of things that we include in graduate qualities include higher order thinking, like critical thinking and problem solving skills, plus soft skills, creativity, communication, cooperation, cultural competence, and influence. They're some of the things that would come under the umbrella of what we call graduate qualities. And although many universities, if you look around most universities, they will say we are teaching our students these graduate qualities.
Professor Jim, I have a request. Can you make your screen full screen so that we can all see it clearly?
Yeah, I just hope I don't lose it on the way. It doesn't click on. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
As I said, lots of universities, if you check on most universities around the world, they'll say that they are assessing these graduate qualities or teaching and assessing these graduate qualities or graduate assessment, graduate attributes, etc. And so what has become a top priority is that people stop doing this in an ad hoc way, because people say they're doing it, but not many people actually do it at all. They just say they're going to do it. And so there's pressure again around the world to say, well, we've got to stop just saying we've got these graduate qualities, our students have these graduate qualities. So we can't just keep saying that. We've got to start getting evidence that they do have it, but more important, that our universities, our faculties, our schools, our departments have evidence that they are impacting, they are actually improving these students on these graduate qualities. That's what outcomes-based education is all about, in essence. So I thought today in this talk, I'm going to do three things. Firstly, I'm going to say, outline some steps about how you might measure these graduate qualities or 21st century skills. And I'm talking about a bottom-up approach to it. Secondly, I'm going to say this is how I think about it, or we think about it at our university. We're working with Melbourne University too now on this. This is how we think about how you might go about measuring these skills if in your university or department you'd like to. And thirdly, I'm going to show you an example of where we're up to with our work. So a practical example. So the starting point I want to talk about, that's still flicking on okay, is it? Is it flicking on? The slides
Yes.
going on all right? Yep.
Yes.
The starting point is I want to talk about a little bit about Sydney University and provide a context at Sydney University. Sydney University in its 2016 to 2020 plan is trying to transform the undergraduate curriculum and the postgraduate curriculum, but the undergraduate curriculum. And so some of the things they've said they were going to do in this time. They want to embed, put into the curriculum, graduate qualities and curriculum frameworks in all undergraduate degrees, which are all outcomes-based, standards-based. We're going to, and we're also going to try and increase authentic and integrative assessment in our majors and minors, etc. Secondly, we're going to do this. We're going to develop a university-wide approach to assessing graduate qualities and more importantly, to measure the attainment of our students on these graduate qualities. And the third bit is another part of the strategic plan is that we're going to try and assure the integrity of assessments as an integral component of graduate quality. So we're going to try and make sure that our assessments give us valid evidence against these graduate qualities. Now, there's lots of other things, but they were the three things that are driving our university in this direction. What do I mean by graduate qualities? Well, when I went there about 4 years ago, they asked me to come and set this centre up. They asked me to come and talk to them about it, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, and I said, well, what are your graduate qualities? And that's what they said they were. Depth of disciplinary, critical thinking, communication, inventiveness, cultural competence, etc. Some of these, of course, are broader skills, knowledge skills, but others are values, etc. And she said, when I went there, Jen, this is what we've said we're going to do, but we don't know how to measure them. Would you help us? I said, fine, we'll have a go at it. And that started it. That's where we started 4 years ago, really, when I first went there. Just to give you an idea, across Australia, I'll come back to that in a minute. There are 43 universities in Australia, and most of them have mentioned graduate qualities in their strategic plan. Very few, if any, report on the impact of their programs, the outcomes of their programs on these graduate qualities. And nobody, in Australia at least, reports on the achievement of individual students on graduate qualities. So where is this student? What are their cultural competence skills like, etc.? So there was the challenge. He said to me, Jim, can you help us measure these? So then we started this project to try and help measure them. And the real challenges I can talk about. Sorry? Do I keep going?
Professor, you can go ahead, please.
Keep going? All right. Okay. So if you're going to look at graduate qualities, as I said, and they're part of your program at a university and your outcomes-based focus, then you do have to have some evidence. You have to have some evidence that your programs are impacting on these graduate qualities, or else it just becomes something you put on your strategic plan. Our university doesn't want to do that. It wants to say, we value these qualities, therefore we have to get some evidence, some outcomes, which will show how we're impacting on them. So that's the first thing. The second challenge is that if you want to measure something, you've got to say how much the university is impacting on the skills. If you talk about how much, and we're having an impact, we've actually got more critical thinking going on, we've got more cultural competence, we've got this. As soon as you start to talk about how much and more, then you're starting to talk about measurement. And you'll see the solution lies in the measurement of how you measure these things. And the third challenge for us is we also said we're going to try, now we pushed it back to 2021 now, we're going to try and report on every graduate from all our programs on these graduate skills. So they'll have a certificate. As part of their testament, they get that presentation. So that's the background to the study, to the work that we're doing there. And now I want to show you how we went about it, how we go about it, because there's nothing magical about it. You can all do it if you want to. It doesn't require a lot of sophisticated psychometrics. It requires a way to think about outcomes, outcomes-based education, outcomes-based assessment, outcomes-based measurement. The first thing, when that Deputy Vice Chancellor asked me, can I help them measure those graduate attributes, I said yes, because I'm led a lot by Lee Cronbach, who in 1990 said, if a thing exists, it exists in some amount. If it exists in some amount, it can be measured by definition. So if somebody says to me, does influence exist? I say, if they can we measure influence? I will say, does it exist? Of course it exists. We think it's important. Okay, then I can measure it. So how do you do that? The way we measure in this, I'm not going to follow the psychometrics here. The way we measure is in the social sciences is we follow the way that they measure in the physical sciences. So I see whenever I'm doing measuring in the physical sciences, there are two steps to it. First, you construct the measuring instrument or the scale. So if I'm going to measure temperature, if I want to measure heat, how much heat there is, I create a thermometer. First, put it in ice, etc., put it in steam, calibrate it, etc. If I want to measure height, I work out what a centimetre is, what a metre is, etc., and I put it on a scale, and then I put something against it, and I can measure it. So if I want to measure anything, I have to first construct the measuring instrument, and then stage two is measure what it is that you want to measure. So after you've got the scale, you bring the thing you want to measure and put it against the scale, and that's how you measure. So if I'm going to measure graduate qualities, like those things I've talked about, I first have to work out how to build a scale, and then I've got to collect some evidence that I can put against the scale. So building the scale comes in, there's 3 steps to it. Step 1, you must have a definition of what you want to measure. When I went to that Deputy Vice Chancellor and she asked me, could I help them do this? And I said yes. My next question was, well, what do you mean by critical thinking? What's your definition for influence? And she said, we haven't got one, which is quite amazing, because how can you decide you want to measure something if you don't know what it is? So the first thing you must do is you've got to define what it is you want to measure. So you need a definition. Once you've got your definition, then you say, what are the components of that definition that I can actually look at in relation to outcomes? I call that the components of it. And third, once I've used that, I have to get some evidence, again, for validating this scale that I've measured, which I'm going to call a rubric, and show that it's a legitimate measure of what it is I want to measure. Once I've built the measurement scale, then I have to collect some evidence, and then I locate or assess the student and put them on the scale. So let's talk about measurement rubrics for a moment. It's not a traditional sort of rubric. A traditional sort of rubric says, here's a question, and this is how I want the student to answer that question, and I'll put it in a rubric. So it's a task-related rubric. Okay, change the question, change the rubric. We're talking about a measurement rubric. And therefore we try and define it in terms of a construct. So the first thing is that then we identify the components, and then we build the validation case. The scale, I talked about a rubric, and the difference in a measurement rubric and a normal rubric is that the components have to describe growth in increasing levels of performance. So I'll just say that again. A measurement rubric, because I'm going to say it's got to have more, or how much, I've got to then take each of those components and describe growth. What does it look like? What does having more of it look like? So the rubric, as I said, is defined in terms of the thing that I'm trying to measure, the graduate quality. Then what you do is you then decide on the components. Now, just to show you here, so there's the definition. Then we come to the components, and the components must come from the definition. You can't have a definition and then have components which don't relate to it, because they are the observable outcomes of that definition, which tell you about whether you've got the graduate quality or not. And the number of components depends upon the quality you're measuring or the construct. And then the third bit, so I've defined the components, and then I've got to describe what growth looks like along those components. And I've got to make it clear so that people can see the difference between this level and this level. I can see it. I can see the difference. And between this level and this level, I can see the difference in those descriptions. And in doing that, without going to psychometrics, we are starting to build an equal interval scale. So just to, show, to talk a little bit about, just describe the steps. The first thing we had to do was get a definition. So if you're going to work in a university like most of you people are working, you can't ask the English department to go and get a definition and the maths department to go and get a definition, etc. We built teams. We asked groups of people to work out what is the definition of each of those graduate qualities. So we had medicine people in there, etc. Groups of about 5 people who went off on all those graduate qualities and defined the construct, defined what it looked like for our university across all the disciplines. We're not saying this is going to fit your university, it's only our university and now Melbourne and so on. So we had to define the construct. And there's an example. This is what they came up with, a definition of critical thinking and problem solving, which is one of our graduate qualities. What is it? And you can, I don't know whether you agree with that or not, but critical thinking is more than problem solving, because if you effectively you have to identify the problem. Very rarely when we give problems when we're teaching or anything, do we ask people to identify the problem? Say, here's the problem, go and solve it. But in critical thinking, you not only have to be able to solve it, but you also have to be able to, in a scenario or something, you have to say, that's the problem, and this is why this is the most critical problem, and this is how you solve that problem. And then you've got to be able to defend your solution. So that's what the groups came up with as a definition of critical thinking. The second step is the components. So if you look at that definition, you see critical thinking consists of the key things are questioning of ideas, evidence, etc., assumptions, evaluating hypotheses, identifying problems, and formulating a conclusion. They're the things in that definition which I can observe. Right, they're outcomes. So I can take those things, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them there. I can take those and say they are the components. Definition of problem or issue in context. Critical questioning of ideas is a component. Creation and evaluation of hypotheses. Formulation of defensible conclusions and best possible solutions. So our definition, these are the things that will tell me whether our students can do that. And the third step is then I've got to show growth from low to high on that rubric. So we then did a lot of work to say, okay, on the definition of problem or issue in context, what are the characteristics that would tell you in your discipline that this person here doesn't know anything about critical thinking? And they came up with this: does not offer a definition of the problem or issue, makes no attempt, blah, 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 blah. How about someone at the top, the real best critical thinkers and problem solvers? What are their characteristics? And you can see under that 3 up there, this is how they define, right across all the disciplines, these are the things that characterize, these are the outcomes that will tell you that somebody doing these things is very high on that component of critical thinking. And they are sequential. And although I call it a 2, I don't have to. The 2 there subsumes the 1, plus it's a bit more because it's got that measurement component more. Further to the right, the more of it you've got. The second one, critical questioning of ideas, did the same thing. Creation and evaluation of hypotheses or alternative arguments. There are somebody does not develop the original hypothesis or arguments, blah, blah, blah. Right up to the top level there, that's building up an image of the characteristics, the outcomes that you would expect from someone who's really at the top of the layer, and you get agreement on that. and formulation of defensible conclusions and best possible solutions. We have built a rubric which shows growth on that construct of critical thinking that we can now apply across to measure student performance. Here's another one, definition interdisciplinary effectiveness. We defined that because we're really keen on getting our people to work cross disciplines to solve problems in authentic situations, etc. That's the definition the university came up with. There are the components that link to that, and there's how we showed growth on that rubric. So we have 9 university-wide rubrics, which we think we can now say across the university, how are we going? How are we impacting? Our students are coming in with this much of this. They're around about here, and at the end they're here. We are impacting. If we're going backwards on critical thinking, that's a problem. But we now have to, we can report at the university level using those rubrics. But there's a question that said, well, that's good, but there's a lot of research which says, you know, our faculties, our schools, our departments will not be able, or disciplines we call them, our disciplines will not be able to use that broad rubric when they're going to mark their students, their work of their students. So we said, well, you can have a discipline-specific rubric for each graduate quality. So pharmacology can, or whatever, physical education, or art, or science, or physics, or maths, whatever you like, that you can have your own. But what you have to do is you have to retain that growth idea. So you can put your own words in there, but you have to be able to translate that onto the university-wide rubric. And then you can go down to an assessment task rubric, as long as you can translate the evidence from the task onto the university and the discipline, because we will report at discipline-specific rubric. One of the interesting things I'll say now is that we've offered that to the 50 different working groups who've got on this across the university from all the different disciplines, and they all come back and they all say, we don't need a discipline-specific rubric. We are happy, we can work off the university level rubrics. So the medical people can. So we can work off this. We don't need to write one for medicine. Engineers, our fine arts, our music can work off that generic rubric, which is great. It also challenges the whole pile of research. So now we have a scale, a rubric. And we then have to validate that rubric, because you can't use it unless you validate it. So we go through a number of steps in validating the rubric. We've used focus groups, including reviews from across 5 different countries. We've put it out there, asked them what they think, is it appropriate, does it grow, all those sorts of things. We've had stakeholder panels since 2019. So the employers are looking at, other universities in Australia look at it, etc., etc., etc. We have disciplinary evaluation studies. So within medicine, they look at it and give us feedback about those rubrics. And we've trialled them since 2018 with assessments. There's a whole pile of things there that we could do. And there's a series of validation questions that you could go through and that we went through. And the main thing is the definition clear? Now people say to me, you know, look, when we put this rubrics, they say to me, these rubrics are value laden. They say what we have to think about cultural competence, etc. And we say, yes, they are. Well, you know, we don't like those values. And I said, but these are the university values. That's what we've signed off on. You better go and find another university and see what their values are if you don't like it that much, or because it becomes part of you. It's part of outcomes-based education. This is what we're about. We don't just give lip service to it. We're trying to embed it in our curriculum. We're trying to look at outcomes. you've got to say sometime, this is it, this is what we are about. So there's those sorts of arguments. I try to limit, I told them when the groups went off, they couldn't have any more than there must be fewer than 7 components. Most of them come up with between 4 and 6. There are no more than 5 categories, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and in the end we didn't try and define a 0. And they have to make sure that the performance levels show perceptible growth. So when we validated, we asked all these different countries, universities, etc., does this show growth on that definition, etc. So that's where we got up to, really, in validating our scales. If you want to have a look at those rubrics, they are on our website, all 9 of them, and you can have access to them. You can work with them if you want to, but they are there, and it shows our thinking. So now we have the scale. Now comes the interesting bit. You see, how do I put student performance against that scale? Now, as soon as our university said we are going to be measuring critical thinking, we are going to be measuring a cultural competence, we're going to be teaching it, building our curriculum and assessing it and reporting to you, I was approached by every publishing country in the world trying to sell me a test of critical thinking. Have we got a critical thinking test for you, or a cultural competence test? Now, I did not take that option. We are not, you can, but if I tried to tell all our different faculties, you've just taken these students through 3 or 4 years of study, and at the end, I'm going to put a test across them to see whether they think critically, the academics wouldn't believe it. They just say that test doesn't fit our discipline. But this is a bottom-up approach. The academics have been working, they built the scales. So how do I collect the evidence? Well, what we've done, the way we think about it is, let's get the academics. We need this on every student. So across a major, we said the associate deans identify majors where there's a close link in what they're doing in that major. The unit in that major is closely aligned to one of the graduate qualities, and we will ask that person, and we will support that person to write assessment tasks, tests or observation schedules or video, whatever they want to do, to write tasks which they will give to the students. The students will respond, and from that evidence from their response, we use that to put against that rubric. So we are now working with our lecturers to be able to get them to write assessment tasks which will produce the evidence to put against the rubric. And then we keep the task, the rubric, and the evidence, and we store it. So if there's any challenge, people say, no, if they can communicate this, they say this person can't communicate well, then you can get access into the system. Here's the task that was used, there's the work the student submitted, and this is how we decided they're at that level. So it's a different model. We're not using a test across the whole university. There's no critical thinking test, no cultural competence assessment. The faculties will decide which units will be used to provide the evidence, and then we support those unit lecturers in doing that on those. And the students get two assessments across 4 years. And so that just says it's collecting evidence of student performance of each student in each graduate quality across a degree program. And the lecturers are helped to develop assessment tasks. Now, different faculties are doing it differently. Medicine have a portfolio, an e-portfolio, where the evidence is maintained across the program. So if they're working with patients, etc., they're assessed on the job, they keep that evidence, put it in a portfolio, earmarked against that rubric which says it's at that level. Other people are using videos and collaborative work and peers, all sorts of different ways they're doing it to produce the evidence to put against the rubric. And the whole focus is on this word evidence. You can't just, and this is critical to your whole outcomes-based movement, education, the tasks, the assessments that you give have to produce the evidence which is related to the outcome. In the past, that wasn't a problem. You just give them a test, you give a mark, you rank order them. But when you move into outcomes-based up, you've got to have the evidence that they've actually achieved that outcome. And so it's a lot of pressure on writing good assessment tasks, not just examinations. We're trying to move more away from examinations per se into what's the best way to collect evidence in this course on this under these standardised conditions as best we can. And so how do we report? You can't read this, but we're still working out how to report. One of the ways to report is to just say on the rubric, you know, if they've got a 2 on this, that was their best performance on working effectively across discipline and professional boundaries. We take that statement, seeks and provides timely and sensitive constructive feedback to colleagues. We've got evidence that this student is at that level at some stage. Then we can put that along with, if there are 3 on that one, we can put that statement and this statement for 3 critical effects. We can write that into a report, which is outcomes based. So we've looked at picking those dot points straight out of the thing and writing a description, which we attest. We've also looked at putting that into a statement for each student, which captures a description of what they know and can do in relation to those graduate qualities. And we've also looked at more different types of reporting, you know, saying where they are on that scale. The problem with that sort of one there, I always find, is people stop looking at the outcome and just look for a number. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to say this is a number. We want to say we've got evidence that this person, some stage through there, has demonstrated these outcomes, this level of skill on this graduate quality. So I'm not in favour of that, but we're still searching for a reporting mechanism, but it will be outcomes based. So in conclusion, you know, I set out to go through and do 3 things for you. Firstly, I said I want to outline some steps that could be taken to assess and measure 21st century skills. You know, some of you may be doing it, that's great, and I'd love to share what you're doing, etc. But I just told you what we're doing. I said, these are some steps that you can do it. There may be other ways, but we see it as a measurement. It's a measurement problem. I want to measure how much of this 21st century skill this person has. And I want to make sure through my teaching in medicine or education or art or whatever, I want to make sure that I'm impacting on that. I am helping that student get more of that graduate quality that people said is important. Okay. And as I said to you, it's a bottom-up approach. We haven't said, here you are, at the end of this, we're going to put a test across you all, and we're going to put a mark into graduate quality against all these graduate qualities, digital literacy, whatever. We're going to put a mark there. No, it isn't. It's part of our teaching and learning program at the university. It's built into our DNA that we have to do this. So that's the first thing I said I'd do, and I hope you can see I've showed you how we go about that and how it is a bottom-up approach. I said I'd talk to you, I would introduce you to a measurement theory that enables any university, anyone, to build their own assessment and measures for monitoring and reporting against outcomes, against standards. The process that I set out there isn't magical. I mean, it's just common sense, really. But it does have that basic measurement theory, measurement idea. I have to describe growth. I have to be able to describe growth on those components that I'm looking at. So then I can get some evidence from what the students have done, and that can go against that, and that's how I mark. Just like I mark an essay now. So, but the difference between the rubric that I say are measurement orientated and the normal rubric is the emphasis is on describing growth, and the rubric doesn't change from year to year. Okay, really doesn't change from discipline to discipline. If you want to measure, it has to be objective. People say, oh, those words don't mean much. You know, those words in the rubric don't mean much. No, but in any rubric, the words are the words. What you have to do is get exemplars which actually specify this is what we mean. This is somebody who's on that border between a 3 and a 4 on defining a problem. This is the sort of thing that would say they're there. And everybody then checks against the standards that you built rather than the words. And similarly all the way along. What we haven't done, and I said this before, we didn't describe as the bottom layer, because whenever you try and say a 0 and what it looks like, you actually say what the student hasn't got. And that isn't what we're after. Our first description is a 1. A 1 says, you know, basically they can just do this sort of stuff. We've got evidence they can just do some critical thinking or whatever. So if they're a 0, it means we haven't got enough evidence yet to suggest you're a 1. So we don't have to describe what they've got at a 0. We just say they're a 0 and says they're not at a 1 yet. So that's how we've got to move them from a 0 to a 1. How do we do that? So the overarching measurement theory there that I talked about is the whole concept of measurement. And I talk about measurement-based rubrics. It's got to have that measurement idea of growth, and I've got to get agreement on that. And the third thing I said I'd do for you is to demonstrate the process through an example. So that is what I did. This is what we are doing at the University of Sydney. It's a big challenge. Every time the Deputy Vice Chancellor and I have a chat, she says, Jim, can we do it? I say to her, I'm fairly confident we can, but really this is really state of the art and it's quite difficult and we have to work really hard at continuing to push it, and we do. It's in our next strategic plan as well. We're not going away because, as you've got in the title of this whole conference, we've got to move from traditional ways of assessment to measuring outcome-based education. So that is the end of my talk. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Tognolini. This was a great talk. We have learned some very useful skills that we are trying to develop at our university also, and universities across our country. So we have a few questions. Will you mind if we ask you a few questions for about?
No, please do. That'd be great.
I will start with a few of my own questions. That do you think that the qualities, the attributes that you have mentioned, they're somewhat different for undergraduate to graduate programs and discipline to discipline, like a subject like philosophy and a subject like electrical engineering? Can you kindly shed a little light on that?
I can. We have, this is our graduate qualities. So these are our graduate qualities. We also have postgraduate qualities that we're working on. So we agree with you that we look at different attributes for our postgraduates, and we've defined those. And now we're going to start to measure those. So that answers your first question. I agree. We've split them up. These are for our undergraduates, etc. The second point was, if you start from the point of view that, philosophy will define critical thinking differently than physics, which will define it differently from music, okay? If you start from that point of view and you then go in to discuss that, you will find that they fight all the time. But if you say critical thinking is an attribute, we all do it. Is there a way we can describe growth in words across the different disciplines? Then that's a different process. That's why we put together philosophy professors. We put together medical professors. We made them into teams, and we gave them a year to come up with a definition that they could all live with, which wasn't discipline specific. It's very interesting. You should try it. It really is interesting. If you think above your discipline and think there's something critical, do we all agree with this definition? Yeah. It doesn't matter whether it's medicine, it's philosophy. The first thing I've got to do is work out what the problem is and why is it a problem. And then I've got to come up with how am I going to solve this problem? What attribute? So if you think about that, that's common across all those disciplines. And that's what we found out. I don't think anybody listening today, if they say, no, we totally disagree in our discipline that is a definition of critical thinking, it's just all wrong, then we've got a problem. But we don't have that problem. We started off by saying, we think we can do this. We sent those groups off. They worked on it. They talked. They interacted. They built up. This is what we think critical thinking and problem solving is. This is what we think influence is. This is how we want to define these. And we got agreement. Then we put it up to the academic board. We had to do some validation, etc. But that's how we overcame that. It's a very good point you raised, but it can be done.
I have another quick question before I will take questions from the audience. Is that when you develop these attributes or skills or competencies, whatever you call, how do you get the stakeholders engaged in the process? Like, do you consult with the employers? Do you consult with the students or their parents? Or how does the industry get involved in this process?
I wasn't there when this happened, but what happened was our deputy vice chancellors and our vice chancellors in those groups met with industry employers, etc., our stakeholders, schools, our principals in our schools that feed into these sorts of things, and so on. Because you see, this is the power of outcomes-based education. If we can change the whole nature of schools. Because now we're saying to them, we value these things. We value critical thinking. So if we're not going to get it from the schools, we'll set our own tests for entry, do all sorts of things. But suddenly, because you've made explicit these things that people value. So we did include principals in those discussion groups. We did include employer groups, etc. And there was a lot of, sort of focus groups about what they did. And eventually they came down with these 9, and then that went to our academic board and then our Senate, who said, these are the 9 that are going to characterise graduate students from the University of Sydney. So you're right. It's a big discussion. But it's, every university will have this discussion. But just having a discussion and putting it on your website doesn't mean anything. You've got to then go and measure it and show. You've got to change your curriculum. Your lecturers have to realise these are important. What does it look like? How do I change my curriculum? Very outcomes based. And so that's a big process that we've gone on. Have we got it right? I think we've gone a long way along the line. We've still got some challenges, but But we're also bringing our stakeholders with us. When we did those definitions and the rubrics, we validated by talking to our stakeholders. This is what we think critical thinking is. Can you see this? If we can demonstrate our students have these characteristics, these qualities here through their work, will that satisfy you that they now have this attribute, which is critical thinking? We did all that. So you've got to bring them with you.
Professor, we have some questions from the audience. May I ask a few of them?
Please do.
Is there any difference between graduate qualities and graduate attributes?
Yes, that's a very good question. We've used the two interchangeably, so we've done a whole pile of work on that and looked at them, and ultimately we say they're the same, and we're sticking with graduate qualities. So I believe they're exactly the same, but we've used graduate qualities in our work because that's what the university decided to define, graduate qualities.
Thank you. We have another question. Why do we need university-wide attribute setting across disciplines, say for all undergraduate programs?
You don't. It's a good question, actually. We need it at the university because it's the university which these students come to. And if we say at a university, we value, these are our graduate qualities. These are the qualities university graduates must have. Our university graduates must have. If you say that in your strategic plan, and you say we value them, then at a university level, you must show that your teaching programs right across the university is having an impact. That is, students come in with these qualities so much, and your teaching has improved them. You have impacted on that. At a university level, you have to do that. Now, therefore, you've got to let everybody know you're looking at the same thing. What is critical thinking? Well, if at a university level we said we've had this impact, it has to be one definition. You know what I mean? I can't have all different definitions for all the different faculties and then try to add it up because I can't tell you what it is if they've all got different definitions. So we went that way. You start with a generic one, but we said to the faculties, the disciplines, you can define your own, but when you do that, you still have to have that order of growth that we've described up here. And we told them they can do that. And as I said, the schools themselves who wanted their own discipline-specific rubrics and definitions at the start have come back and said, we don't need them. We can work off these. And that has been that's come from the schools themselves who start to do this and realise these descriptions do apply across all the different disciplines or different faculties. Again, I told you at the start of the talk in that first thing, this is a bottom-up approach. I haven't said this is what we're going to do. I said this is what our aim is. We want to do this. Go off, and if you have problems, come back, and we talk them through. But it's been quite revealing that when the different disciplinarians who use these now are starting to use these, when they're using them, they're saying we don't need our own definition, but we don't even need our own rubric because we can mark against those rubrics. Very interesting.
Do we have to take one more question? Can I ask one more question?
Yes, please. I'm yours for it too. Another 4 minutes.
So this question is, a faculty is saying, if I personally like to use rubric, although time consuming to prepare, however, students are not interested to check out anything but scores they receive as part of an assessment. This is more a concern sharing than a question. Still, what can be done to make students interested?
That's a very good point again. And remember, those stakeholder groups included our own students. And so our arguments will say, well, we will still give a mark for chemistry. Okay, that'll be on the certificate, but there's also a statement of these value statements against what the stakeholders want. So the students can say we're not interested all they like, but if the stakeholders are on board and they say, well, we want evidence of your communication skills, then the students better get on board and start to give that evidence to them. So it's a case of how you sell that concept. If you bring the stakeholders and together with the students and they have this discussion, this is important. This is what we value, and so on. Now, if this, you know, and there's lots of different ways. I mean, I haven't had time to go through this, but there's lots of different ways you can integrate the two quite nicely, the academic and the graduate skills, so it could contribute to their final mark. But what we're going to put on that certificate is that description. As soon as I put a number on there, as you just said, and that faculty finds, they're only interested in the number. They're not interested in looking at the description. So don't give them both, because they won't look at it. And that's an outcomes-based education. That's a big challenge. The number is just a code which says I've got evidence that you can achieve these outcomes, but they think the number is the end product. It isn't. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you put a mark and a description together, everybody just goes straight to the mark. But it does require education. But so does your challenge. Transiting from traditional to outcomes-based education isn't done overnight, and it's going to take a lot of bringing people along, students along, etc. It requires that, and that's what we're trying to do. We've got to bring them with us, and it's part of what I think your conference must be all about. How do we get people to understand what the hell we're talking about? Well, you've got to involve them, and you've got to help them understand, and you've got to think it. You've got to help them realise this is important for them.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Tognolini. It was a very interesting and insightful talk. We have learned a lot, and we will most likely contact you in future whenever we need further insight from you. Thank you again very much. Thanks to the audience, and I'm giving it back to Dr. Anisur Rahman, the anchor of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Professor Alamgir, and I would like to also thank Professor Tognolini for your outstanding work. I'm sure the process that has been introduced here for developing and validating rubrics can be used in our university as well as around the world. Thanks again, Professor Tognolini, for your illuminating talk again. We really appreciate your presence.
It's a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.